The courtroom was already tense before I even walked in. You can feel it sometimes. The air gets thick with bad decisions, unpaid debts, broken relationships, and people who spent months lying to themselves before they ever got to my courtroom. That day was one of those days. A woman named Allison Gardner stood at the plaintiff's table, angry, exhausted, and convinced she had been robbed. Across from her stood Andrew Beard, cowboy posture, defensive eyes, the kind of man who thought every favor came with invisible strings attached. At first glance, it sounded simple, a truck sale gone bad. But simple cases don't end up in my courtroom, and they certainly don't involve a missing dirt bike. The moment I started asking questions, the timeline began falling apart. That's always where the truth hides, in the timeline. Allison claimed Andrew sold her a beat-up 1992 Ford pickup truck for $2,500. According to her, they had a relaxed arrangement, friends helping friends.
She'd pay him when she could. No pressure, no deadlines. That already told me two things. First, the arrangement was doomed. Second, nobody had written down a thing. She got the truck sometime around August, maybe the first week, maybe earlier. Nobody could remember dates properly. Another bad sign. But one thing became clear very quickly. She had possession of the truck long before she paid much money for it. By October, she'd only paid him about $1,000 total, and yet she'd already been driving the truck for months. That's when my internal alarm bells started ringing, because people love to rewrite history after relationships sour. Suddenly, friendly agreements become fraud. Suddenly, borrowed property becomes stolen. And suddenly everybody remembers conversations that conveniently favor them. Then came the first twist. Allison admitted that after driving the truck for 6 or 7 months, she decided she didn't want it anymore. Not because Andrew repossessed it, not because it exploded, because it wasn't working out. That phrase always fascinates me. People talk about vehicles like they're dating relationships. It just wasn't working out. Well, sweetheart, neither was your payment schedule. According to her story, she called Andrew around February and asked if she could sell the truck to someone else. He supposedly agreed, said no problem, said he'd even return the money she'd already paid him once it sold. Now that sounded suspiciously generous for a man she later claimed was dishonest. But then things got stranger, because during this same period, Andrew had possession of her son's dirt bike. A small Honda bike that had supposedly needed repairs. And according to Allison, Andrew offered to fix it as a favor. That word again, favor. I've sat on the bench long enough to know that favors between friends are usually loans waiting to become lawsuits. She claimed he picked up the dirt bike, promised to repair it, then stopped returning her calls. Then, according to her, she discovered he had sold the bike, sold it, a child's dirt bike, without permission. Now the courtroom shifted because the truck issue was messy. But the bike? The bike had emotional weight. Mothers don't walk into court calm when they think someone sold their child's property. Andrew finally got his turn to speak, and that's when the second twist landed. According to him, he repossessed the truck because he discovered Allison's fiancé, a man with multiple DUIs, had been driving it illegally. Now suddenly this wasn't just about late payments anymore. It was about risk, liability, trust, and underneath all of it, resentment. Andrew claimed he'd repeatedly asked for payment because he was injured and struggling financially after a rodeo accident. That detail mattered. People don't usually repossess trucks from friends unless they feel desperate. Then he dropped another bombshell. He said the dirt bike wasn't just sitting at his house for repairs. He claimed it had become collateral for the unpaid truck. Now we had two completely different stories. One side said he was fixing it as a favor. The other side said she agreed I could hold on to it until the truck situation was resolved. And here's the thing people never understand about court. I don't need perfection. I need probability. Whose story makes more sense? That's the real question. Then came the moment that changed everything. I discovered Allison had actually gone back and taken the truck again after Andrew repossessed it, left her own car behind, used the truck to move houses. That told me something very important. Neither side respected boundaries anymore. This had become personal warfare disguised as a property dispute, and once disputes become emotional, logic disappears. Andrew admitted he eventually traded the damaged truck for a boat. A boat. That alone told me everyone involved was making terrible decisions. But the real mistake came next. He admitted he sold the dirt bike. That was the fatal move. Did Allison deserve her truck payments back after driving the vehicle for months without fully paying for it? Absolutely not, but Andrew had no legal right to sell that dirt bike, especially without clear written proof that it was collateral. That's the problem with handshake agreements. Everybody remembers the handshake differently. In the end, I awarded Allison the value Andrew received for selling the bike, $550. Not revenge, not emotional compensation, just fairness. And as they walked out, both still angry, I remember thinking something I've thought thousands of times on that bench. Friendships rarely survive money. But then came a case that was somehow sadder. A tiny Maltese puppy named Isis and one terrible accident. Christina Munoz sat in front of me heartbroken. Across from her sat Erica Malloyd, clearly devastated too. That matters. Sometimes defendants walk in arrogant, defensive, cold. Erica wasn't cold. She looked haunted. According to the story, Christina briefly left Erica alone with her little dog while she went upstairs. A simple favor. Watch the dog for a minute, that's all. But within moments, tragedy struck. The leash wrapped around Erica's ankle. She tripped, fell directly onto the puppy, and the dog died from collapsed lungs before reaching the hospital. The courtroom became quiet after that. Even the audience stopped shifting in their seats. Because unlike the truck case, nobody here was trying to scam anyone. This was grief, pure grief. Erica kept repeating one thing. It was an accident. And she was right. It was an accident. But accidents can still create responsibility. That's what people struggle to understand. Negligence isn't always malicious. Sometimes it's simply failing to pay enough attention. I asked Erica a question she didn't expect. I asked, "What if you accidentally ran over the dog with your car?" Suddenly the room understood. Responsibility doesn't disappear just because you didn't mean harm, and I could see it hitting her in real time. That's the hard part of my job sometimes, not punishing people, making them understand consequences. The puppy had cost nearly $1,500. I awarded the full amount. But honestly, nobody won that case. Not really. Then the courtroom energy changed completely, because next came romance, betrayal, and one spectacularly foolish truck purchase. A young woman named Allison Abushan had dated Christopher Wilson for about 5 months. 5 months. That's barely enough time to know somebody's middle name. Yet somehow she'd already financed a truck for him. Why? Because he didn't have money, or credit, or stability. 3 excellent reasons not to finance someone a vehicle. Christopher moved in with her after she finished college. He bounced between jobs. His parents sent him money. She supported him financially. Then came the surprise. He suddenly returned to Kentucky to deal with issues involving his child. Translation? He went back to his ex and kept the truck. Now, if this were just another breakup story, it wouldn't have reached me. But then the bank charges surfaced. Thousands of dollars disappearing from a shared account. Gas purchases, cash advances, electronics, food, business expenses, all while he was supposedly figuring out his life back in Kentucky. And the entire time he wore this smirk, that little smirk defendants sometimes wear when they think charm will save them. It never does. I asked him for proof he'd made truck payments. Nothing. No receipts, no records, no credibility. Then came my favorite moment. He challenged the calculations, said the numbers were wrong, so I made him stand there and do the math himself. Watching people argue with arithmetic is one of the unexpected pleasures of courtroom life. In the end, the evidence was overwhelming. He had used her accounts, spent her money, and abandoned responsibility the moment adulthood became inconvenient. Judgment for the plaintiff, more than $2,000. And another young woman learning an expensive lesson about confusing love with rescue. By that point, the courtroom had already seen broken friendships, dead pets, repossessed trucks, and disappearing money. But the day still wasn't finished. Next came a construction dispute soaked in family drama, a carpenter named Jeffrey Castleberry suing his former boss, Megan Watson. But underneath the wage dispute was the real story. He had been dating her sister. That's when I knew immediately where this case was headed. Never mix romance with employment, especially not family businesses. It always ends with somebody accusing somebody else of theft. Jeffrey claimed he quit after relationship problems and was still owed wages. Megan claimed his work was terrible and he stole tools. Now here's what caught my attention immediately. She had already paid him repeatedly for earlier jobs, which meant his work had apparently been acceptable until the relationship exploded. Convenient timing. Then came the famous door measurement argument. Megan claimed Jeffrey measured a door wrong and cost her money, but under questioning, she admitted something crucial. She had been standing there measuring it with him. That changed everything. Construction errors become shared responsibility when the boss signs off on the measurements. You don't get to supervise a mistake and then blame only the employee later, especially after a breakup. The deeper truth became obvious. This wasn't about carpentry. It was about bitterness, about family loyalty, about emotional fallout disguised as business complaints. I awarded Jeffrey his unpaid wages, and as they walked away angry, I remember thinking that construction projects are easier to repair than damaged relationships. Then came one of the more troubling cases of the day. A young welder named Mark Windhausen, 24 years old, living with a woman 10 years older than him, no driver's license, bad credit, and a growing cocaine problem. By the time he stood in front of me, his life was already wobbling dangerously off balance. He claimed his ex-girlfriend Lana kept a truck he'd paid for. She claimed he barely contributed financially and spent money on drugs. And then she said the word cocaine. Everything changed because suddenly all the missing money made sense. The disappearing bank funds, the inconsistent work history, the impossible financial math. Mark insisted he'd contributed cash constantly. Cash for the truck, cash for furniture, cash for appliances, always cash. That's another courtroom pattern. When documentation disappears, suddenly everybody paid cash. I asked him the question that cracked the whole thing open. Would he take a drug test? He hesitated, then admitted marijuana use. But I wasn't asking about marijuana. Eventually, the truth seeped through the cracks. Cocaine. The room shifted immediately because drug addiction changes everything around it. Trust evaporates, money disappears, relationships rot slowly from the inside. Lana wasn't innocent either. She knowingly let an unlicensed man drive a truck in her name. Another terrible decision in a day full of them, but she also wasn't responsible for carrying his addiction. I told him something blunt that I hoped might stick. At 24, cocaine will turn your brain to mush faster than you can imagine. Some people hear me, some don't. I offered him one final path. If he could secure financing in his own name, the truck could be transferred, a slim chance. But adulthood sometimes starts with proving you can stand on your own credit, literally. And finally, just when I thought the day couldn't get any stranger, in walked a man suing for baseball cards. Not joking. Baseball cards. James Mixon had lived rent-free with his girlfriend for over a year. According to her, he was a lazy bum. According to him, they simply had an arrangement. I always love when unemployed men use the word arrangement. Usually it means a woman paid most of the bills. Sure enough, that's exactly what happened. He claimed he paid utilities. She claimed he contributed almost nothing. But the true treasure in that courtroom wasn't the furniture. It was the baseball card collection. The moment I saw those cards, I recognized them instantly. Topps, Fleer, old school collector material. And suddenly even I got interested because unlike the relationship, those cards might actually appreciate in value. Then the case took another bizarre turn. She accused him of slashing her tires, had a witness, no police report, no documentation, just accusations layered on top of resentment. That's what happens after ugly breakups. Every disagreement becomes criminal in hindsight. In the end, I ordered his property returned. Furniture, cards, all of it. And as they left the courtroom, still angry, still defensive, I realized something about that entire day. Every single case had started the same way. Friendships, relationships, trust, every lawsuit began long before anybody filed papers. It began the moment people stopped protecting themselves. No contracts, no receipts, no boundaries, just emotion making business decisions. And emotion is terrible at paperwork. That's why they end up in front of me.